Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Thomas. I'm a program specialist in the Division of Energy Assistance at the Office of Community Services. On behalf of our office, I would like to welcome you to our webinar today on LIHEAP performance management. Today's topic is using data to inform benefit determination procedures and coordination with other assistance programs. Today's webinar has two main purposes. First, the webinar will provide an example of how to use real data to assess your LIHEAP benefit determination procedures and how to examine and model potential changes to your benefit determination procedures. Second, the webinar will include grantee presentations about the real-life opportunities and challenges faced when LIHEAP is coordinated with other energy assistance programs. The audience for this webinar is all state LIHEAP grantees and any grantee staff who are interested in learning how data and information from other grantees can be used for performance management. Today's webinar features several speakers. As you can see from the list here, we're very fortunate to have several LIHEAP state coordinators and staff sharing information with you as your peers. We hope this webinar is valuable, and we thank you for your attendance today. With that, I'll hand it over to Kevin McGrath from Apprise.
Thanks, Kate. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin McGrath, and I'm a project director at Apprise. I work closely with the PMIWG and specifically the data case studies team. So let's get started with an overview and an outline for today's webinar. Next slide. So today's webinar will be structured in two parts. First, we're going to review a case study for the Oregon LIHEAP program in which we examine their benefit determination procedures, recommended updates, and then simulated the impacts of those updates. We'll spend about half of the webinar covering this topic, and we'll hear from Lisa Gobin and David Kaufman from the Oregon LIHEAP program, as well as myself, and we'll have a question and answer session following this part of the webinar. Next, we'll hear from some of your colleagues about the challenges and opportunities they face in coordinating their LIHEAP programs with other energy assistance programs in their states. We'll have another question and answer session following this part of the webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, we encourage you to use the question box in your GoToWebinar interface. This will enable us to review the questions and respond during the Q&A sessions or via email following the webinar as needed. Next slide. So if you're new to the GoToWebinar platform, here's an example of how you can submit your questions ahead of the Q&A sessions. If your GoToWebinar sidebar is minimized, click the orange arrow button to bring up the full interface, and then navigate to the questions panel where you can type and enter your questions. Next slide. So before we jump into the content, I'll give a brief overview of each part of the webinar. As mentioned, part one will cover a data case study done with the Oregon LIHEAP program. In this part, Lisa Gobin, David Kaufman, and I will provide an overview of how energy assistance programs are structured in Oregon. We'll follow that up with a review of how LIHEAP benefits are determined and what some of the limitations were of the prior benefit matrix. We'll discuss updates that were made to the benefit matrix and then a simulation analysis where we modeled the impact of the changes to the benefit matrix. Last, we'll discuss recommendations that came out of the simulation analysis, as well as challenges and next steps. In part two of the webinar, we'll hear from Tracy Smetana from Minnesota, Brian Worrell from Pennsylvania, and Brian Sarenson from Washington State about the challenges and opportunities they face in coordinating their LIHEAP programs with other energy assistance programs that are offered in their states. Next slide. So with that, we'll dive into the data case study with the Oregon LIHEAP program, and I'll turn it over to Lisa Gobin.
Hi guys, this is Lisa from Oregon, as Kevin stated. And I'm going to take you through the first couple of slides. So in Oregon, LIHEAP is administered by Oregon Housing and Community Services and implemented by generally local community action agencies. OHCS also administers the Oregon Energy Assistance Program that we call OEAP, which is funded by investor-owned electric utilities in the state. OEAP has the same income guidelines and uses the same benefit structure as LIHEAP, but the funding for OEAP may only go to customers of the 2 utilities that fund that program. Many gas investor-owned utilities also have their own gas assistance programs, such as Northwest Natural has their OLGA program, which is implemented also by the local agencies. The OLGA program uses the LIHEAP matrix and manual, but is not under the OHCS umbrella. And many community-owned utilities, such as municipals and cooperatives in the state, also have their own programs. Next slide, please. The LIHEAP statute requires states to assure that the highest level of assistance will be furnished to those households which have the lowest incomes and the highest energy costs or needs in relation to income. So to comply with that requirement, OHCS uses an energy assistance benefit matrix, which accounts for income and average energy costs, among other factors such as heat type and household size. Next slide. So current procedures were established around 2010. The benefit matrix that utilizes multiple data sources to estimate energy expenditures, such as the average energy usage by fuel type from EIA's Residential Energy Consumption Survey, also known as the REX data, average energy usage by household size from EIA's REX data, and fuel prices also from EIA's State Energy Data System, commonly known as SEDS. Benefit amount is based on share of estimated bill, paid, and the amount paid varies by SMI category. So income level versus times household size. And now I'm going to turn it over to David Kaufman to walk you through the next couple of slides.
Thanks, Lisa. So the next 2 slides, page 12 and 13, talk about how we determine the benefit amounts. The first thing we do is we look at determining a baseline fuel cost, which uses average price, average usage, and inflation factors. The second is household size, assuming that larger households use more energy. And then the third is adjusting for climate region. In Oregon, we have 2, east and west. I know some states have more, but we've been able to get by with just 2. The fourth is determining the benefit. Oh, sorry, thank you. Determining benefit amounts based on estimated fuel costs. We have 4 tiers. The lowest 0 to 15% of state median income. They get the largest benefit. So, for example, they would receive a $410 benefit, whereas the highest income in that group, 46 to 60, would only receive $200. And that was the assumption that we made. As you'll see later, Kevin will get into a little bit more detail about that, but that's a general overview of how we determine it.
Thanks, David. So now I'm going to take you through some limitations to the benefit matrix that we identified when we were doing some work with David and Lisa. So as David and Lisa mentioned, the LIHEAP benefit matrix for Oregon uses publicly available data from multiple data sources to estimate what the energy bills are for households, and this varies by heating fuel type. So both the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, or REX, and the State Energy Data System, or SEDS, both of which are products of the Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration. These are both very powerful tools available to help you understand residential energy broadly and residential energy prices, consumption, and expenditures in your state. However, they do have some limitations, and making use of them in the best way requires careful analysis. So early in 2019, David and Lisa reached out to Apprise to discuss ways in which they could improve their benefit determination procedures. And we worked with them to identify some limitations in the current benefit matrix. So first, we identified that there were some outdated sources being used. In particular, the main source of information being used for developing estimates of average energy usage was the 2009 REX. Second, we identified that the estimates from the 2009 REX were for average energy usage for the United States as a whole, But we know that energy usage varies widely across individual states. So what the average residential home in the US uses might be very different from what the average residential home in Oregon or another state uses. And third, we identified that households using different types of heating fuels were being treated differently under the existing benefit determination procedures. And what I mean by that is for non-electric heating fuels, that is natural gas main heat or fuel oil main heat or propane main heat, the energy usage estimates from the 2009 recs only represented their heating fuel usage. But those households might use electric to run their heating equipment, or they might use electric to cool their homes. So this represented an underestimate of the home energy needs, that is the heating and cooling needs for these households. We also saw that for electric, the estimates that were being used were the average electric usage for all households who use electric. Now, some households use electric for heating purposes and some households don't. So for using electric estimates for electric main heat households, this was an underestimate of their usage as well. So conceptually, there were some differential treatment of the heating fuel types that we wanted to address by looking at some new data sources. Next slide. So based on those observations, we recommended to David and Lisa that they take some incremental changes that would hopefully help to improve the energy usage and energy expenditures estimates that underlie the benefit matrix. First, we recommended updated estimates based on the most recent residential energy consumption survey, which was the 2015 recs. So moving from the 2009 recs to the 2015 recs. Just as a side note, the RECS is a survey that's conducted once every 4 to 6 years, and there's sometimes a time lag in when the data are made available to the public. So even though we started working on this in 2019, the most recent data available were the 2015 RECS. The second recommendation we had was to better align the geography of the energy usage estimates to match Oregon. Now, the RECS is a national survey, and in most iterations of the RECS, there's not enough sample respondents to have estimates for every state, but it does have enough sample respondents to have estimates for the census regions and sometimes the census divisions. So we recommended to David and Lisa that the Oregon LIHEAP program use energy usage estimates for the West Census region rather than the United States as a whole, in order to better align the estimates with energy usage in Oregon. And third, we recommended treating each heating fuel type equitably and putting them on a level playing field. So to do this, we recommended adding in the electric usage of households who use natural gas, fuel oil, etc., as their main heating fuel, so that they were looking at the total residential energy usage. And we also recommended using the average electric usage specifically for electric main heat households rather than all households who use electric. That way, when they were looking at what the average usage was for each of the main heating fuel types, they were looking at an apples to apples comparison of total residential energy usage. Next slide. So here's an example of how the average energy consumption estimates varied under Oregon's prior matrix from fiscal year 2019 compared to the updated procedures for fiscal year 2020. On the left-hand side, under the heading fiscal year 2019 matrix, are the average energy usage from the 2009 recs. If we look at the row labeled electricity, we see a value of 38.6. This represents 38.6 million BTUs of average usage. And it represents the average electric usage for all households in the United States. In the row labeled natural gas, we see the value is 67.8 million BTUs and represents the average natural gas usage for natural gas main heat households in the United States. On the right-hand side of this table, under the heading fiscal year 2020 matrix, we see two columns, one that represents the average main heating fuel usage and one that represents the average electric usage. And both of these estimates come from the 2015 recs. So we can see, if we consider just the main heating fuel usage, the story looks like one thing, but if we factor in the electric usage, it looks different. And so this is why we recommended to David and Lisa that the procedures be updated to factor in both the heating fuel usage and the electric usage of each main heating fuel group. Next slide. And here's another example of how the data updates were different when looking at the old matrix from fiscal year 2019 to the new matrix in fiscal year 2020. So as Lisa mentioned, one of the factors on which Oregon varies its benefits is the size of the household. So they make an adjustment that says energy usage is typically more as the household size increases. So there's an adjustment factor that they use, and they build it off of a table from the residential energy consumption survey. And so this was another area that we updated, worked with them to update. On the left, under the fiscal year 2019 matrix, the values are from the 2009 recs and represents the average usage by household size for the United States as a whole. On the right, it represents the average usage by household size specifically for the West Census region. The numbers aren't very different, but it's always good when new data sources are published to go back in and check whether the data you've been using still represent valid and accurate estimates of what energy usage is in a more recent period. Next slide. So one of the challenges with making updates to benefit determination procedures is the time gap between proposing a change, implementing the change in the program year, and then having the ability to collect and analyze data for clients who are served after the change went into effect. One way to work around this challenge is to do a simulation analysis where you use data for existing clients to simulate or project what the outcomes would be with the changes in effect and compare those to the outcomes achieved using existing procedures. So this can help you to course correct and make further adjustments if the proposed changes don't meet your objectives. So for example, when we started this process with Oregon, it was roughly April 2019. The changes that were recommended and went into effect were implemented for the start of fiscal year 2020, which is October 2019. Data for clients served in the fiscal year 2020 program won't be available to David and Lisa until a few months after the close of the program year, so not until early 2021 when they collect the energy bill data from the utilities and energy vendors. So that's roughly a 2-year period from when Oregon began the process to when the actual data to examine the impact would be available. Now, rather than waiting 2 years, Oregon could use a simulation analysis and available data for current program participants to estimate the impacts of the changes to their benefit matrix. And that's exactly what we did with them. Next slide. So using data that Oregon collected for households who received LIHEAP benefits in fiscal year 2019, what we did was we assigned each household the benefit that they would receive based on their household size, their income level, their heating fuel type, and climate region, each of those dimensions that David and Lisa discussed about their benefit matrix. And we used the updated fiscal year 2020 benefit matrix and the fiscal year 2019 benefit matrix to compare what the outcomes were according to those two parameters. So what we did was we compared client outcomes in terms of net energy burden, that is the energy burden after receiving LIHEAP, using both the simulated fiscal year 2020 benefits and the simulated fiscal year 2019 benefits. And we looked at both group outcomes as well as individual outcomes. And I'll dive into those two concepts in a little bit. So based on what we learned from this set of simulations, we then recommended a few additional adjustments to the fiscal year 2020 benefit matrix. And then we simulated those outcomes for further comparison and consideration in the upcoming fiscal year 21 program year. Next slide. So let's dig in a little deeper into what the simulation analysis involves. And we're going to start by looking at an example of two hypothetical clients. So client A has the following characteristics. They use electricity as their main heating fuel. They have 3 household members, and they have income of $15,000. This places them in the SMI category of 16 to 30% SMI in Oregon. and this household lives in climate region 1. Client B has the following characteristics. They use natural gas as their main heating fuel. They have a smaller household size, 2 members, but they also have $15,000 of income, and based on their household size, this also places them into the 16 to 30% SMI category. This household lives in climate region 1 in Oregon. Next slide. So under the prior benefit matrix, the one that was used in the fiscal year 2019 program year, client A would have received a regular benefit of $435. So if you start in the column on the left labeled electricity and move down to household size 3 with the income level for this household, we see the benefit amount circled in red. Client B, if we move over to the natural gas column, we see for this household size and income level, they would have received a benefit of $250. So this is how we would assign the simulated fiscal year 2019 benefit for these 2 clients. Next slide. Now we're looking at the updated fiscal year 2020 benefit matrix. So again, the same thing. We move to the place on the benefit matrix where each client resides, and we see that for client A, their characteristics would make them eligible for a $400 benefit circled in red. And for client B, under the natural gas column, we see that they would be eligible for a $425 benefit circled in green. Next slide. So for these 2 hypothetical clients, this table shows what their income level is, their total energy bill, their gross energy burden before LIHEAP, and then what the impact of the simulated benefits are. So for the 2 simulation scenarios, it allows you to compare what the different net energy bills are and the net energy burdens are for each client. So in this example, we see that under the old benefit matrix used in fiscal year 2019, the simulated benefit of $435 for client A results in a net energy bill of $565 and a net energy burden of 3.8%. But under the benefit matrix used in fiscal year 2020, the simulated benefit is $400, a little bit less than the 2019 matrix. And as a result, the net energy bill is $600 for this client and the net energy burden is 4%. For client B, the one who used natural gas, the simulated benefit in fiscal year 2019 is $250. That leads to a net energy bill of $900 and net energy burden of about 6%. Under the fiscal year 2020 benefit matrix, the benefit that this client is eligible for is $425, yielding a net energy bill of $725 and net energy burden of 4.8%. So in the actual simulation analysis, all clients in the data file that Oregon had collected for the program year were assigned their simulated benefits for fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020 and their net energy bills and burden in this fashion. Next slide. So let's take a look at what the results were from the actual simulation analysis. We'll start with the average income, heating bill, electric bill, and gross energy burden of clients, and we'll break this down by main heating fuel. And what we're looking at here is all clients for whom Oregon was able to collect annual energy bill data in fiscal year 2019. I'm mainly going to focus on the households who use electric or natural gas as their main heating fuel, since in Oregon that represents most households. Relatively few clients use fuel oil or propane, so the sample sizes on which those statistics are based are fairly small. So we're going to just focus on electric and gas for the next several slides. And what we see here for electric, the average income is $15,735. They have an average electric bill, which is shown under the main heating bill column of $1,262. And they have a mean gross energy burden of 8%. For the gas main heat clients, they have average income of $16,602. They have a heating bill of $527, an electric bill of $930. And if you add those 2 together, their total residential energy bill is $1,457. So about $200 more in total energy bill than the electric main heat households. And as a result, they have a bit higher energy burden before LIHEAP of 8.8%. Next slide. So next, we'll look at how the different benefit matrices address energy burden needs. So on the left-hand side of this table, we see the results from the simulated fiscal year 2019 benefit matrix. On the right-hand side, we see the results from the simulated fiscal year 2020 benefit matrix, the updated benefit matrix. If we look at the row for gas main heat clients, what we see is under the 2019 benefit matrix, they got an average simulated benefit of $257. If you deduct that average off of the average total energy bill and recalculate their energy burden, that is an average of 7.2% net energy burden. Under the simulated fiscal year 2020 matrix, if we look at the values highlighted in yellow, we see that the average benefit for the gas main heat households is much higher. It's $387. And that yields a net energy burden for this group of 6.4%. So we can see that in this example for gas main heat households, the 2020 benefit matrix yields a better net energy burden outcome for the clients. But because most households in Oregon who participate in the LIHEAP program use electricity, the overall impact of the simulations, the change between the 2019 matrix and the 2020 matrix is fairly limited. So if you focus on the row labeled all households, it shows you what the overall average benefit was. And in the 2019 simulated matrix, it was $346. In the 2020 simulated matrix, it was $364. So it's telling us that there wasn't very much change for the benefit levels assigned to electric main heat households, but it does help to treat the natural gas main heat households a bit more equitably. And that goes back to what we saw with the REX data, where if you want to do an apples to apples comparison and treat the main heating fuel types equitably, you should consider both the heating fuel and the electric usage of the fuel type. Next slide. So next, we'll look at how the simulated outcomes differ for high burden clients. So for those of you familiar with the performance measures report, these are the 25% of clients with the highest individual energy burden. So we define them in the same way here. And so this table is looking at what their income is, what their heating and electric bills are, and what their gross energy burden is before receiving the LIHEAP benefits. And what we see again here is that the bills are a little bit higher for the gas main heat high burden households, and everybody in this table, on average as a group, has a very high energy burden coming into the program. Next slide, Jorge. So now we'll take a look at how the simulated benefit matrices address energy burden needs of these high burden clients. So again, on the left-hand side is the simulated fiscal year 19 benefit matrix. On the right is the simulated fiscal year 20 benefit matrix. And we see a very similar result to what we saw for all households. So there's an improvement for the households who use natural gas as their main heating fuel. And this is driven by that change that was introduced into the benefit determination procedures, where the non-electric main heating fuels were treated more equitably to electric main heat. So the benefit amounts to gas main heat clients increased as a result of that change. But again, because most clients use electricity, if we look at the all households row, the average benefit according to the 2019 matrix was $404, a net energy burden of 18.6%. And if we look at the 2020 matrix, the average benefit was $425 with a net energy burden of 18.3%. So not that much difference between the two benefit matrices, even though there were changes introduced to provide a more equitable outcome for different groups of clients. Next slide. So how do these simulated results translate in terms of the benefit targeting and burden reduction targeting indexes that you've become familiar with? As a reminder, the benefit targeting index provides a measure of whether the program targets higher benefit amounts to the high burden households. the burden reduction targeting index provides a measure of whether the program targets reducing the energy burden by a greater extent for high burden households. And what we see here on both measures, the benefit targeting and the burden reduction targeting index, the change in results are similar. So if we look at the overall program, the all households row, there's no change between the benefit targeting index, and there's just a minor 1-point increase in the burden reduction targeting index. But if we go up and we look at the row for natural gas main heat, we do see an improvement in the benefit targeting and the burden reduction targeting. So according to the 2019 matrix, benefit targeting was 104 for gas main heat. According to the 2020 matrix, it was 115. So that means that in 2019, the program was estimated to pay 4% higher benefits to high burden gas households. In 2020 matrix, it's 15% higher benefits to natural gas high burden households. We also see an increase in the burden reduction targeting. So these stem from those changes, again, that were introduced to the matrix, where the fuel types were treated more equitably and the benefit levels to the non-electric heated homes were increased. Next slide. So far, what we've looked at has focused on group outcomes. That is, what's the average income for the group, and what's their average energy bill and average LIHEAP benefit? How does that change the average energy burden for the group? One thing about group averages is that they can obscure differences among individual clients. So it's important to conduct a distributional analysis to get a richer understanding of who is being served by the program, what are their needs, and how the program helps to address those needs. So what we're looking at here is a table that shows the distribution of income, residential energy bills, and gross energy burden for natural gas main heat households that are served by the LIHEAP program in Oregon. We also did a similar analysis for the electric main heat clients, but we're just going to focus on natural gas to demonstrate the example. Previously, we saw that the group average burden was about 8.8% for natural gas households before they received LIHEAP. But when we look at the bottom row, what we're looking at is the distribution of gross energy burden for all gas heated clients. And we see that for about 10% of these clients, their gross energy burden is about 4.4% or less. And on the other side of the table, the right-hand side, there's about 10% of gas heat clients who have a gross energy burden of 26.1% or more. It's a very wide range. So even though the average for the group was 8.8%, the distribution is fairly wide. And we can look at the rows above, which show the income and the total residential energy bill, to get a sense of how those values vary in order to understand this gross energy burden. So on income, we see that about 10% of clients have about $6,000 in annual income or less, and that about 10% of clients have $29,000 in income or more. In terms of energy bills, we see that the total residential energy bill for these gas heat clients is $800 or less for about 10% of them, and for about 10% of them, it's $2,200 or more. So there's a wide variation in income, in energy bills, and the gross energy burden among the natural gas main heat clients. And the story is similar for clients who use electric main heat. Next slide. So now what we're looking at is the distribution of the simulated benefits and simulated net energy burden for these same clients. So we can get a better understanding of how each of the matrices does in terms of addressing individual client needs. We see that in the top row, the average simulated 2019 benefit was $257, but the range wasn't very much. It was $250 for the bottom 10%. It was $280 for the top 10%. If we go down to row number 3, the simulated fiscal year 2020 benefit, we see that the range is much wider. So it ranged from $285 in the bottom 10% to $550 in the top 10%. So the new matrix had a lot more variation in it because of how the electric bill was added to the main heating fuel bill for the natural gas main heat clients. And as a result, there's a wide range in net energy burden in terms of both the 19 and the 20 benefit matrices, but it's a little bit narrower for the 2020 benefit matrix. Next slide. Now, another way to look at individual outcomes is to categorize households according to whether they have an affordable or unaffordable net energy burden. So in this table, what we're looking at is we've categorized households as either receiving a bill credit. So in this case, their simulated benefit is greater than their total energy bill, or they have an affordable net energy burden. So they have a net energy burden between 0 and 6%. Or they have an unaffordable net energy burden that's greater than 6% but less than 10, or an extremely unaffordable net energy burden that is greater than 10%. And what we see here is the values, the number, the share of households in each of these categories is basically the same, whether you look at the 2019 benefit matrix or the 2020 benefit matrix. So even though we saw some improvements for natural gas main heat households in the 2020 matrix, on overall for the program, we just see that the individual outcomes are fairly static. So there wasn't much improvement as a result on an overall basis. Next slide. So based on the findings that we saw in the previous slides, it appeared to us that the targeting achieved by the 2020 benefit matrix was limited. And this was in part due to differential in benefit levels for different income groups, and the fact that there's a minimum and maximum benefit level that's put into place in the benefit matrix. And these findings are based on what we saw both in terms of the performance measures targeting indexes. So there wasn't much difference between the benefit targeting index or the burden reduction targeting index, and that we also saw individual outcomes for clients with about half of them being affordable and about 2/5 being unaffordable, regardless of which benefit matrix you were simulating. So this led us to propose and consider 2 further adjustments for the next program year in order to try to help improve that targeting. So option 1 would be to increase the benefits by 10% to the households in the lowest income category and decrease by 10% the benefits to households in the highest income category. It would also involve lowering the minimum benefit from $250 to $200 and raising the maximum benefit from $550 to $600. Option 2 was a bit more aggressive in terms of the increase in benefits. So it would be a 25% increase in benefits to the lowest income category, 25% decrease in benefits to the highest income category, and a lower minimum benefit and a higher maximum benefit. So 2 different scenarios to see how can the program potentially better target benefits to the clients that it's serving. Next slide. So here are the group average simulated results for these 2 alternative options. On the left is option 1, the 10% option. On the right is option 2, the 25% option. And if we just look at the row for all households, we see that the outcome is fairly similar. So the average benefit under option 1 is $368. The net energy burden is 5.8%. The average benefit under option 2 is $372, so only $4 more, and the net energy burden is 5.7%. And now this makes sense because in both of these options, there was an increase in benefits to one group and a similarly sized decrease in benefits to households in another group. So we would expect for there to be a similar outcome, that the overall average benefit would stay about the same. Next slide. But if we look at the results of these alternative options for high burden households, we do see some improvements, some better targeting occurring. And this is largely the result of high burden households having lower income. So we increased the benefits to the lowest income households, and since most of the high burden households fall into the lower income groups, the high burden households typically received the 10% increase in benefits or the 25% increase in benefits, whereas the non-high burden households received the 10% or 25% decrease in benefits. So if we look at the all households row again, we see for option 1, the average benefit is $454. The net energy burden is 17.9%. Now, a few slides ago, we looked at what these net energy burden outcomes were according to just the 2020 matrix, and that value was 18.3%. So there's a bit of a reduction even with option 1. With option 2, it was an even larger reduction. So there they had an average benefit of $490 and a net energy burden of 17.4%. Next slide. And likewise, the performance measures targeting indexes both improve more under these simulations for the 2 alternative options because of that increase in benefits to the lowest income households. So you can see if you look across the all households row, option 1 benefit targeting index score is 124. And option 2, where there was the even larger increase in benefit to the lowest income category, it's 132. So in both of those cases, the program is targeting even higher benefits to the high burden households. And similarly, under the burden reduction targeting index, the scores improve. They increase to 92 under option 1 and 95 under option 2. So they get closer to treating high burden households equitably with all households in terms of reducing their burden. Next slide. But when we come back to our analysis of individual outcomes, what we see here is that regardless of which option we look at, option 1 with a 10% increase to lowest income households or option 2 with a 25% increase to the lowest income households, the outcomes are still roughly the same. And this challenge is not unique to Oregon. So that's something important to realize, is that a lot of states face this same challenge. You know, when you implement a benefit matrix, you're assigning values based on average energy bills that you're estimating or gathering in some way. And earlier, when we did our distributional analysis, we saw that the energy bills, the income, the burden, varied widely for a group of households. So even though the average may be X, the distribution could range from a lot less than that to a lot more than that. And that's exactly what we saw here. So whenever there is a lot of variation, there's going to be a challenge in addressing the needs of individual clients. And this table here underscores how important and valuable the actual energy bill data is that you're now collecting for your programs for the performance measures report. It gives you a really valuable tool to assess what client energy needs are on an individual basis. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to David Kaufman, who will take a couple of steps about what Oregon is doing next and where they're going. And then after he's done, we'll open it up for a question and answer session. So on to you, David.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, we as we were talking about this, we had to spend some time discussing what our short-term goals were and what our long-term goals were. And as Kevin said, the difference between the 10% and the 25% options was not significant. But for program year 2020, we did get some, I won't say pushback, but there was anxiety in our network about the increase in some of the benefit amounts. We've been slowly trying to move people away from looking at household numbers, households served as an indicator of the success of the program, and moving toward more of a burden-based outcome, looking at what did we actually accomplish. So we decided that we wanted to continue the momentum. We wanted to continue working on this and chipping away at it. So we opted to go for the 10% option for 2021. But our long-term focus, maybe holy grail is a little dramatic, but the goal is eventually to do real-time calculations at the time of intake. One of these days we'll get there, but that's a very long-term goal for us. In the meantime, we also have the challenge of coordinating all these different benefit programs. So not only coordinating our own, which, I mean, because we have two of the bigger programs, that does help, but the Oregon Low-Income Gas Assistance Program that Northwest Natural has is independent of us, as are all of the other IOUs and the COUs that have their own programs. So we're not entirely sure how we're going to deal with that. We may just have to do the best we can and call it good. But the more we talk with all of the utilities, we talk with all of our partners and stakeholders around the state, we're learning an awful lot. And it does help that many of the other utilities use our guidelines, our manual, and our matrix, but not all. So we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But it's been really interesting, though, to the more we learn, the more fascinating this becomes. So, Kevin?
All right, I'll turn it over to Jorge now, who's going to open up the question and answer session.
Hello, this is Jorge from Apprise. I just want to remind everyone that you can type questions into the question box in the GoToWebinar client. So the instructions on how to do that are on the screen. So if anyone has any questions, I'll receive them and read them to any of the presenters. So that would be Kevin, Lisa, and David. So we got one question for David and Lisa, I think. And the question is, did you examine how the changes you were considering would impact program spending? Did that change, or was that held constant?
We did. We spent quite a bit of time talking about that and trying to figure out what the impact would be. And we knew that, well, when I say we knew, we were pretty sure that there would be an impact on spending. But we haven't actually looked at that yet, examined it yet. Once we get through 2020, we will. We assumed there would be. We knew that some of our benefit amounts increased, of course, and so we anticipated a drop in total households served. But one of the things that we couldn't figure out, we didn't really understand yet, still don't, is what the impact, if any, there might be on our crisis payments. Would we do more? Would we do less? Of course, I think it would be an understatement to say that this year has been a bit unusual, and so I'm not sure we're going to be able to really attribute anything to the different way we're calculating the matrix. But our first priority has been to have a better understanding of the outcomes. What did we actually accomplish? We gave we provided assistance to a household, but then what? In the early indications, and Kevin touched on this earlier, early indications were that we were indeed providing a higher benefit to high burden households, but we were not paying a larger share of their energy bill. And so that's what we've been trying to chip away at.
Thanks, David. We have another couple of questions from the audience. The first one is there a concern making this change, as there could be a large increase in applications this year due to COVID-19 and the economy?
Yes, absolutely. Now, having said that, we're fortunate that, of course, we did get the LIHEAP CARES Act money, and then our legislature appropriated an additional $15 million from the coronavirus relief funds, which technically is still under the CARES Act, but because it came to the state and then to us, it's a different set of rules with that. But so we did get more CARES Act money, and we did get the CRF, the additional $15 million in CRF funds. But there's so many variables this year. We don't know when the moratoriums are going to end. Anyway, they're just way too many variables. So yeah, it is something we're concerned about.
Thanks. And the other question that we got from the audience is, what is the percentage of households using electric heat versus natural gas overall?
In Oregon, roughly, oh gosh, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was about 75-ish% electric and about 14% natural gas.
Yeah, I think that's about right. It is very predominantly electric, with the rest of the small subset of households who don't use electric using natural gas. So about 75% natural gas and 15%. 75% electric and 14 to 15% natural gas.
Yeah.
Great. And there is one more question. The question is, this is very helpful to see. Is this type of simulation something that you could also do to consider different uses of the CARES funds?
So yes, this type of analysis isn't limited strictly to, how you might change your benefit matrix. You might consider a supplemental benefit through CARES Act or some other vehicle to distribute benefits to clients. And so you have data on them, from last year, what their income was, what their energy bills were, what benefit level they received. And you can do some forward-looking projections where you make maybe certain assumptions about how income changed over the last year because of coronavirus, and maybe how you want to target those CARES Act funds. If you want to target the highest burden households, what might the program look like under that scenario? Or if you want to target all households generally, but varied a little bit by income level, how does that look? So yes, there's a wide range of ways that you can do these types of analyses under different circumstances.
Thank you, Kevin. So I don't see any other questions from the audience coming in. If you still have questions and you maybe didn't have the time to type them in, you can type them as we go, and then when we get to the next question break, I can read them to whatever presenter you are directing the question to. So Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Jorge. So now we're going to turn to part 2 of the webinar, which will discuss the challenges and opportunities for coordinating LIHEAP programs with other energy assistance programs. And we're going to start with Tracy Smetna, who will talk about LIHEAP in her state, Minnesota.
All right, thanks, Kevin. As Kevin said, I'm Tracy Smetna with the LIHEAP program in Minnesota. I am the program planner. And so I'm involved in a lot of different aspects of what we do, and I'm also on the performance management work group. Next slide. So the other energy assistance programs that I'm going to talk about today are utility-run programs. And so they do have some separate energy assistance programs from LIHEAP, and the investor-owned natural gas utilities and our largest electric vendor, which is Xcel Energy, are required by statute to have their own energy assistance programs. And it's the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, that oversees their programs. They're called Affordability Programs, so if I use that term, that's what I'm talking about. There is one other electric utility that has its own voluntary program. They're not required by statute, but through some negotiations in some other projects, they came up with their own program. And so all of them are set up somewhat similarly. They're percent of income programs and also have an arrearage forgiveness component. Each of the programs is designed by the utility, so they're all a little bit different and kind of have their own flavor. For example, the percent of income requirement is different. It varies between 3 and 6% of household income as the payment amount. And the arrearage forgiveness component likewise is different from utility to utility. Typically, it's also where the household would pay a certain portion, and then the affordability program would pay the other portion, basically breaking out the arrearage to be paid off in 12 to 24 months. Again, that varies by utility, and some vary the time frame based on the dollar amount of the arrears. So next slide. And so just like they're set up in different formats, they also are administered in different ways. And so one of the programs, Minnesota Power, they're the voluntary electric discount program. They administer their own program directly. There's two programs that the Salvation Army administers for Great Plains Natural Gas and Minnesota Energy Resources. And then the other four programs, which include the two largest utilities, Xcel Energy and CenterPoint Energy, those are administered by Energy Sense Coalition, which is a local energy advocacy nonprofit organization that represents low-income energy users, and they participate a lot in activities at the Public Utilities Commission. Next slide. And so these programs are administered separately from LIHEAP, but they're also connected to LIHEAP. And so the main connection is eligibility determination. For most of the programs, households need to actually receive LIHEAP to be eligible for the utility program. The exception to that is the voluntary program with Minnesota Power. In that case, a household only needs to be eligible for LIHEAP. They don't have to actually receive money from LIHEAP. And then the other piece is benefit determination on the utility side. So for their affordability programs, some consider the amount of the LIHEAP benefit when they determine their arrearage forgiveness and also the affordable payment level. Some do, some don't. Some consider it for, the affordable payment, but not for the arrearage forgiveness, or vice versa. So it's really a mixed bag on that point as well. Next slide. And so because they are administered separately from LIHEAP and yet are really connected to LIHEAP, there's some challenges. And so the first is, the data system. So we don't have any kind of shared data system between the programs. And so Minnesota does have a pretty developed data system. We can create a lot of different reports and do a lot of analysis for LIHEAP, but we have no way of knowing what's happening with our households that also participate in the affordability programs. We don't know which households participate. We don't know which ones bump on and off of the affordability programs for missing their payments or something like that. So it's really very siloed. So the other piece is related to decision making. So LIHEAP and the PUC make decisions about how to assist households, and it's of course the same population of households, without really having information about the interaction between LIHEAP and the utility programs. And so generally, the PUC will hold meetings where the utilities provide reports and updates and so on regarding their reports or regarding their programs. And when the PUC has questions about LIHEAP, they rely on utility information or some of the energy advocacy organizations, typically the Energy Sense Coalition. And not to say that those folks don't have accurate information, but it seems they could come right to the source to get that information as well. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma. Next slide. And so what's happening with the affordability programs doesn't typically influence the decisions that we make when we think about changing our program, the benefit levels or the benefit matrix, those kinds of things. But one area that we do think about is if we make other changes, particularly to the income guidelines, where we might expand the pool of the eligible population, that could have a large impact on these affordability programs, because it is in statute for those that are required to offer them that it's based on LIHEAP recipients. And so if we make changes to our program that all of a sudden increases the pool for LIHEAP recipients, it could really cause some issues for these affordability programs. You know, for example, some might be, you know, at their max already, and now they're spending time turning people away. Might be complicated for them to be answering a lot of questions related to the changes in our program. You know, the other complication is if we, you know, say in response to COVID-19 had decided, hey, let's bump up our eligibility guidelines, and then once that crisis passes, we drop them back down. Now it creates a dilemma for folks that have been receiving that affordability program and now are no longer eligible because we made some changes. So we do consider those types of impacts when we make decisions about that. Next slide. And so some things that we think could improve coordination between LIHEAP and these utility programs going forward would be to work with energy vendors and possibly the program administrators to help train our service providers, our local agencies, about the different nuances of these programs and how to really make sure that households who will benefit the most can get in and apply and receive help from these affordability programs. So in most cases, it's households with the highest energy costs, not necessarily energy burden, but the highest energy costs, or households that have large arrears balances that tend to get the most benefit from these programs. A lower usage household, their percentage of income payment might actually be greater than what their usage is. And so, you know, that can cause some problems if service providers are out there trying to get, you know, let's get all these people signed up for these affordability programs, but some of them really see no benefit from it. It just causes some problems, and it sort of deters the service providers from wanting to help get folks on those programs. The other thing that I think would be useful is to create a path for the Public Utilities Commission to get information directly from LIHEAP, and also for us to get information directly from them about program changes or things that they might be considering. Now, a lot of it's in statute, so the PUC doesn't have a lot of control over changes that might happen. But if they're making changes in what they're expecting from the utilities, for example, in terms of, you know, reporting or coordination, it would just be helpful to have that as more of an open dialogue than it is today. Next slide. All right, so that wraps up Minnesota. I will turn it over to my colleague and friend, Brian Worrell from Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much, Tracy. My name is Brian Worrell, as she said. I am the LIHEAP Policy Director for the state of Pennsylvania. Technically, my division is called the Division of Federal Programs and Program Management, so I also get to work with the SNAP program in addition to LIHEAP. So I'm going to speak to you about some of the energy programs that are available in Pennsylvania aside from LIHEAP. And in fact, one of them will actually sound almost exactly like what Tracy was talking about with Minnesota. So if we can go to the next slide. We have two options that are provided for by our Public Utility Commission in Pennsylvania. The first is a Customer Assistance Program, or CAP program. And then the second is a LIHEAP program, or a Low Income Usage Reduction program. These are both regulated by the PUC, and they require all of our regulated utilities to offer these programs. They are actually operated very similar to the way that LIHEAP is operated by ACF. You know, as a block grant, we have a lot of flexibility in how we all administer our program, so we can tailor it to the best way to help the residents of our particular states and our particular regions of the country. You know, there are those overarching assurances that we have to meet and certain regulations, but, you know, for the most part, we all have great flexibility. PUC has the same in their CAP and their LIHEAP programs for the utilities to use. They put out specific rules and regulations that overarch and define the general CAP and LIHEAP programs, but those utilities can then decide within the context of those rules how to best use those programs to target it to the customers that they can help the best. They do all, similar to what Tracy was saying for Minnesota, they do all offer an arrearage forgiveness component. And very similarly, it's either a 12-month or a 24-month period where, as long as the household is making consistent monthly payments on their CAP program, they will see a percentage reduction in their past due arrearages. So next slide. So again, these programs are administered wholly separate from the LIHEAP program. Each utility, as I said, has the ability to tailor it to what suits their customers the best. Many of the utilities do administer the program themselves. I think one or two do subcontract out the administration of the CAP program, but like I said, for the most part, they all do it themselves. And then each of the utilities has their own data system for tracking those households that are receiving the CAP or the LIHEAP benefits. And so this makes it a little bit difficult for us because in addition to, it's not even as simple as just PUC has the data and we have the data system on our side and we just have to match up those two data systems. The utilities have to report all their data to the PUC, which has to compile and collect all that data and try to maintain that and keep an eye on that data. And so that makes it even more difficult for us to try to coordinate amongst us all. Next slide. So I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit as I talk. So outcome measurement is obviously, as I was saying, with the data system not being shared amongst us all, there's a lot of work that goes into trying to do any sort of measurable data analysis on the program. Like I said, the utilities can do their own data analysis easily enough on their own customers, but then PUC has to try to reach out to each utility to get the information to do that and compare that. And then there's no real way for us to then compare it against the actual LIHEAP benefit to see how LIHEAP is actually interacting with all these CAP households. And so what this has really resulted in, and it's a very small problem for us right now, it rarely happens, and when it does, the impact is very minimal. But we see some households that have a CAP payment that is lower on an annual basis than what they qualify for in LIHEAP cash. So for example, they might have a $30 CAP benefit amount that they're required to pay. Over a 12-month period is $360, but they get approved for $500 in LIHEAP because we do not factor utility bill amount into our determination. We have a benefit matrix that is based solely on utility type, income amount, household size, and region of the state as determining factors. So, like I said, right now it's a very small percentage of households that we see that happening with, because the PUC currently has our CAP energy burden at 15%, which is still quite high for these low-income households. The reason that it's on our radar right now is because our PUC recently did an energy burden study to evaluate whether they want to amend their CAP rules to require that the energy burden for these CAP households be reduced to 12%, 10%, or 8% even. PUC has not made an official determination or released any sort of official decision regarding that yet, but we know that there's the possibility for it. And so if they do decrease or that energy burden target, we may see this as a larger issue as people have lower CAP payments and are still getting the same level of LIHEAP benefit. So we're starting to have conversations with PUC just to sort of try to figure out if there is any way that we can do some sort of data analysis to determine what impact the energy burden target will have with these CAP programs in conjunction with the LIHEAP benefit that we're issuing, to try to make sure that we are using our LIHEAP dollars as they are most effective. So the next slide. So as a part of this conversation, we do require that any vendor that receives LIHEAP benefits on behalf of one of our households to reach out to that household to try to enroll them in the CAP program. The CAP program has a 150% of the federal poverty income guidelines limit, much the same as our LIHEAP does. That's one of the nice things about it, is that, you know, we can say they're income eligible for LIHEAP, so then they're income eligible for the CAP program. So you need to reach out to try to get them enrolled. Obviously, they still need to actually choose to enroll. We don't mandate that the person has to be enrolled. It's still the household's option. But we do require the utilities to do that outreach to try to make that determination. And so in order to help facilitate that, we've begun having conversations with our stakeholders about the possibility of doing some form of data sharing between DHS and the utilities for those that are specifically determined eligible for that utility, to basically say, you know, we verified their income and approved them for LIHEAP. Here's what it is, so that then the utility could potentially use that as a part of their outreach. They would still have to do outreach to actually get the client's permission to enroll them in the CAP program, but at least it helps minimize the burden on the household on the back end to potentially enroll in the CAP program if they so choose. On our side, having that data sharing ability will help us to better identify those households that do get enrolled in CAP because of their receipt of LIHEAP, and also sort of better gauge how much their CAP amount might be. So that will help us to determine if there are any adjustments that we need to make in regards to our benefit matrix. And that sort of tells the story from Pennsylvania's side. So now I will turn it over to Brian Sarenson out in Washington.
Hello. Like Brian said, I am Brian Sarenson. I'm the LIHEAP program manager here in Washington State. I am also a member of the PMIWG on the data case studies team. And at the my first attendance, I was labeled the other Brian, since Brian was there first, which I am okay with. Our programs are a little bit different than what you've heard from the other two, so we will go through those. Our other energy assistance programs, some of our investor-owned utilities have energy assistance programs that are separate from LIHEAP, but are administered by our community action agencies that we contract with for LIHEAP. So Puget Sound Energy has the HELP program, which is the Home Energy Lifeline program. Vista has LIHEAP, which is a low-income ratepayer assistance program. And then Cascade Natural Gas has the, I hate calling it the WEAF program, but it's the Washington Energy Assistance Program, Washington Energy Assistance Funds. And Cascade Natural Gas crosses both Washington and Oregon, which is, you may have heard it in the first presentation, they also serve parts of Washington. And then there are several of our other smaller utilities, some of our co-ops, our mutuals, and municipalities have their own assistance programs that are operated independently of the ones that we have here. Next slide, please. So with our relationship to LIHEAP, while these programs are administered separately from LIHEAP, they do interact. So for households that are in a VISTA service territory, they can receive either LIHEAP or LIHRAP. And if they're a PSE customer, they can receive both LIHEAP and PSE. However, when the PSE benefits are determined, the PSE's benefits are a usage program where we are a heat cost program. So their heat cost is deducted from their annual usage before the benefit for PSE is implemented. So that's how those work together. Next slide, please. So relationships to LIHEAP. Our office at Washington, and we're the Department of Commerce here at Washington State, we provide the adjusters and the constants for the program formulas used by Puget Sound Energy. I am part of the advisory committees for all three of the investor-owned utilities PSE, Avista, and Northwest Cascade, so that in the decision-making process, we can help to provide guidance so that LIHEAP and these programs interact well together. Program intakes. So when a household applies for LIHEAP at our local agencies, they can also apply for PSE or LIHRAP benefits, and then those are determined by our agencies. And our data system actually captures not just our LIHEAP benefits, it captures our Puget Sound Energy program and Avista's LIHRAP program, all in one integrated system. So we collect not only heat costs, annual usages, but our full range of demographics on all household members, which is very, very helpful. Next slide, please. So coordination of programs. Although we do operate them separately, we have been able to integrate several of the operations together. We did have, last year, we ran LIHEAP at 125% of the federal poverty level, where PSE was run at 150%. And as we move into 2021, we are increasing our LIHEAP to 150% so that everything runs on the same income guidelines inside our data system. And being able to look at other programs in combination with LIHEAP allows us to do some really interesting and fascinating to me, because I'm a numbers nerd, that allows us to really look at heat costs, heat burdens, and how our families are impacted. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the impact analysis. I was a program manager at one of the larger counties for LIHEAP, weatherization, and home repair program. And when I was down there, we were able to pull information out of our system to offset, take a look at energy burdens and how we were doing in serving the lowest incomes with the highest energy burdens. So Washington State is very interesting in that those over 200% of federal poverty level have an average heat burden of 2%. And much like Oregon, as you go down the income ladder, it gets much higher. Many of our customers are at that 20% level for energy burden. And when I was able to look at this LIHEAP and PSE together, we were able to move them to 1 to 2% and get them in range with everybody else, instead of the 6% that we get for most of our other customers based on just one assistance. So this is something that I am hoping to look at a statewide level to see what we can do about ensuring that we can get everybody to a 6%. And I know that's a lofty goal, but I would love to get everybody in our state to a 6% energy burden, so that they could afford their energy bills like the rest of the state. That would be wonderful. Next slide, please. Oh, we're at the question slide already, so I apologize for talking fast. I'll turn this back over to Jorge, and if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So again, I've brought up the instructions on how to type in a question in case you want to ask anything of the presenters. We do have one question from the audience that came in while you were presenting. This question is for Tracy. So Tracy, for the program where the applicants just have to be LIHEAP eligible and don't specifically have to be a LIHEAP recipient, how are they determining that these households are LIHEAP eligible?
Okay, thanks for the question. In most cases, the local community action program that runs the LIHEAP program in the area does the eligibility determination. I know this particular utility has bounced back and forth where they've done it themselves. And we do actually have the ability to send the utility a file to indicate who has been determined eligible in addition to who's actually received benefits.
Thank you, Tracy. We have another question for Brian from Pennsylvania. And the question is, data sharing with the utilities sounds exciting, but that usually is a large amount of effort. Can you elaborate on how you are approaching this with your utilities?
Sure. Like I said, I mean, we're not definitely doing data sharing. It's just sort of an exploratory conversation that we've started having with our LIHEAP advisory committee in Pennsylvania. We want to make sure that, you know, before we proceed, that everybody involved, including our client advocacy groups, are all comfortable with the approach we're taking. We are fortunate in Pennsylvania to already have some secure methods of exchanging information with our utilities because of the way that we do our payments. You know, when we approve a household for payment, we before we actually transmit any sort of payment to the vendor, we actually have a batch report that is securely transmitted to them to basically say this household has been approved for, and this is more for crisis, this is on the crisis side of things. You know, this household's been approved for crisis. You can go ahead and, you know, submit for payment on the back end through our Promise system, which we share with our MA, our medical assistance, I should say, programs population. So the utility can then go in and submit verification on the back end that they have restored service or filled the tank, whatever the crisis resolution was, and then they get payment. And so in order for them to know that that's been approved, we pledge them the crisis dollars so they connect the service, and then they also get this batch report via a secure method to confirm that it was processed and it's there so that they can then put in that payment. So like I said, we already have a system somewhat in place as far as the secure method of transmission. It's just a question of developing the reports for it. You know, one of the things that we would have to do, and we've already basically explained this, is we would be looking to add to our LIHEAP application a permission request from the household when they're applying, you know, and it would be its own specific question where they would have to mark, you know, yes or no. And then obviously if it was left blank, we would default it to no. Regarding, you know, if you are eligible for LIHEAP, do you want us to share your income information and any other household information with the your utility to help enroll, you know, to help determine your eligibility for a customer assistance program to lower your utility bill or something along those lines. We don't obviously have language yet because, like I said, we're still very early on in the conversations. But, you know, as I'm saying, you know, we have that in place, and we have a very strong data warehouse already set up for our system that allows us to build those types of reports. So it would just be a question of adding that question into our eligibility system to capture that, and then making sure that we can pull it as a part of our reports, which we already do pull a lot. And so it's just setting up some automation for that. So, I mean, the nice thing in Pennsylvania is that because we have an integrated system that's shared amongst our 4 programs, LIHEAP, SNAP, TANF, and MA, you know, we have a very robust data warehouse already available to us to help with that data sharing.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you, Brian. So now I'm going to turn it on to Kevin. He will take us to the conclusion of the webinar.
Thanks, Jorge. So I'll wrap up with a brief summary. Next slide. So today we talked about a few things, and we have some points here that we hope you take home. So one is to assess the availability of data as you're considering changes to your program. You know, there are a lot of public data sources available to help you make informed decisions about your programs, whether it's trying to understand energy needs or what the size of your eligible population is or specific subgroups. And in addition to those public data sources, you're now also collecting performance measures data on energy bills that can be used in the same fashion. So there's a wealth of information out there, and you should assess its availability to see how it can help you make informed decisions. The second point is to engage in a process of continuous improvement. So when you make a change to your programs, examine the impact of that change and determine if additional refinements are needed. And one of the things that we saw today is you don't have to wait the 1 or 2 years that it might take in order to get the data to assess the potential impact of a change. You can do a simulation analysis to help you understand ahead of time what the impacts might be and what additional refinements you might need to make. David Kaufman stressed some short-term and long-term goals of the program in Oregon, and I think those are short and long-term goals that a lot of you have. On the long-term side of things, you're collecting energy bill data now and reporting it on your clients as part of your performance measures report, but make use of those data. Try to figure out ways in which those energy bill data can be useful to you in establishing your program parameters and your benefit determination procedures. And last, as Tracy and the Bryans spoke about, nobody operates in a vacuum. There are lots of states where there are energy assistance programs that are operated outside of LIHEAP, but there are interactions. So consider how your programs interact with those other energy assistance programs or energy efficiency programs, and consider what opportunities and challenges that presents for understanding your impact. There are certainly some challenges in getting to that point where you can understand what the combined impact is of programs. But if you get to that point, you'll really have a rich understanding of how it is that you're impacting the livelihoods of your clients and what additional approaches could be useful to helping them. Next slide. So we have up here our contact information. I'd like to thank Lisa and David from Oregon for presenting today, as well as the members from the PMIWG data case studies team. We have Brian Sarenson, Brian Worrell, and Tracy who presented, but we also have Deborah Brown and Christine Taylor, who you've heard from on other webinars, and Sharnice Peters, our representative from OCS. So thank you to everybody, and our contact information is up there on the screen. On the next slide, we have the contact information for myself and Dan and Jorge at Apprise. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. I don't think we mentioned at the start, but the slides for this webinar are available in the handouts section of the interface. So you can grab those slides, download them, and contact us as needed with questions related to this content or other. Next slide. Again, thank you for attending. And if you did have a question and we didn't get to it, we'll make sure to send you a follow-up email after the webinar answering the question that you had. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you everybody for presenting. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.